let's get straight into it. I believe joining us on the line now from Rustenburg, Uzma. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam. How are you, Farzana?
Alhamdulillah, I'm well. Yourself?
Alhamdulillah, I'm very well, thank you.
Now, just before I start this conversation, I'm going to just extend a very, very warm virtual hug to you. I know that I shouldn't be feeling like, there's this fragility in you because you've written something that is so powerful and so strong, and you're so positive about your whole process that you've gone through. But at the end of the day, you do need a little bit of solidarity. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for you.
Ameen, thank you.
Before we launch into the ovarian cancer issue, just tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, I'm 24 at the moment. I turned 24 in October. I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer at the age of 23. I was studying psychology prior to my diagnosis. For the past 5 years, in fact, I've been living in Johannesburg because of my studies. And after the 5 years, I decided to come back home before venturing into my master's program in educational psychology, because I felt being away from home, missing out on my family growing, things like that was important. So I just wanted to come home, spend some time, and then continue with masters thereafter. So little did I know that Allah planned something else for me during my gap year last year, and that's when I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. So I had to just put my masters on hold for a while. But what incredibly amazes me is that Allah could have decided to give me this disease at any time during my studies, yet He refrained from doing that, and only did so when I moved back home, knowing that I'd probably be in my comforts and be looked after very well while being at home and not hampering my studies in a sense.
Well, now, do you feel now that you've had the cancer diagnosis and you're in remission, you're recovering from surgery, that you're forced to become a spokesperson for cancer?
Absolutely. Personally, the reason I went into psychology is because for me, making sure somebody else's life better is far important than sort of making mine in a sense. And I feel like with this diagnosis, it gives me an added advantage to it, because I've interacted with a lot of cancer patients over my treatment months and so forth, and some of them find it very difficult to handle and accept the diagnosis. Well, basically because cancer is known as the silent killer, and the treatment, especially chemotherapy, is very draining, psychologically, emotionally, physically, physiologically. And for me, being a spokesperson, knowing that I've had a stage 4 diagnosis and that alhamdulillah I'm in remission now, should be my priority, because somebody else needs hope, somebody else needs help, somebody else needs just a little bit of a push and encouragement as well.
Okay, so let's look at ovarian cancer. It begins in the ovaries, and every woman, of course, has her two on every side of the uterus. And I believe the ovaries are the size of an almond, and of course, those are the ones that produce our eggs and the hormones estrogen and progesterone. So, look, what gave you an indication that something was going wrong?
What gave me the indication was that I experienced a lot of abdomen pain. Well, basically, I was abroad, and that's how I was diagnosed, because I was in the care and responsibility of somebody else and not my parents. So my uncles had actually forced me to go to the doctor to deal with or have my pain looked at, because I actually overlooked it. I thought it's abdomen pain, it could be probably period pain. Let's just take a few Panados or paracetamol, then I'll be okay. But obviously the pain didn't decrease thereafter after taking the Panados, and I had an increase in fever. So that's how I ended up at the doctor, and everything else just went rolling from there. But when I look back now, I experienced all the symptoms of ovarian cancer. I just neglected to take them as something serious.
Do you think it's because you felt that you were very young that you didn't notice the symptoms?
To be honest, I had no prior knowledge of ovarian cancer before my diagnosis. So the symptoms, in fact, are so everyday-like that you will neglect them. Things like bloating, cramps, abdominal pain, constipation, fatigue, urinating more frequently weight gain and obviously lower back pain. Those are the symptoms I experienced, which I know now are all the symptoms for ovarian cancer. So because they're so simple and basic, I don't think anybody would really attribute it to something such as ovarian cancer. Well, that's my personal saying of that.
Yeah. I introduced the topic today using the word the Angelina effect, not necessarily because I'm affected by Angelina Jolie or her lifestyle, but she's never lacked influence. If you look at it, when she adopted that a little baby from Ethiopia, there were a whole lot of Ethiopian adoptions that doubled. When she named her children Maddox, when she named her kids Vivian, they shot up in the popularity charts. Those kinds of things. When she did her elective double mastectomy 2 years ago, it became this cultural and medical earthquake, so to speak. So last week she hit the New York Times with this article about her removing her ovaries, removing her fallopian tubes and things like that. Wait, now, you were currently, of course, I believe, in bed rest, you're resting, you're recovering from your surgery. What is your immediate reaction when you open up your laptop, newspaper, whatever, to look at this article?
Well, firstly, I thought, because she's got the history of cancer, it might be wise for her to do it to sort of prevent the cancer diagnosis from occurring. But as you say, things she does take a crazy effect in the media, in her followers, or whatever it is. Obviously I had to click on and read further at what she was saying, because now anything ovarian cancer is sort of a red alert for me. But at the same time, I don't know how wise it is for anybody to just simply go and have this effective treatment to have their ovaries removed, because it's not just a simple thing to decide, okay, I'm going to have my ovaries removed, end of story, I'm not going to have cancer anymore. There's a lot of more psychological attachment to it, and I suppose it may have been easier for her because she's already got 6 children. She sort of, in a sense, doesn't need the function of her ovaries. It's just a bit concerning that now that she's done it, everybody's going to think that it's sort of the okay way to do, where I feel there might be other preventative measures to take before enforcing your ovaries to be suddenly removed and sort of stunting yourself into menopause, because I've stunted myself into menopause because I've had to have my ovaries and so forth removed.
Yeah, when I looked at all of this phenomenon, of course, is known as the Angelina effect, and lots of people feel like, because she's doing it, this radical surgery that becomes the gold standard treatment. They feel compelled to push for the same way. There's no definitive treatment that's right for every single woman. It's obviously a balancing act that happens. But what would you say about, when this news broke, the first person I spoke to was my sister about it, because we've moved into our years beyond childbearing, and I say, well, look, it's becoming concerning for us to retain optimum health as we move forward into the next stage of our lives. How do we, would we opt for something like that? Do you think she's done something good, something bad? And the one thing that we did agree on was that she's opened up the platform to have these discussions. Now, I would think that's something very, very important.
Absolutely. I think if you've reached that age, because ovarian cancer is, supposedly only develops thereafter, like at the age of 40 plus. If you've reached that age, and I think if you have a history of cancer, mainly a maternal history of cancer, then I think it might be wise to do that. And as you say, you've already past that childbearing age. But for somebody of my age, I think it would be really drastic to do something like that without considering other options, personally.
Yeah. So let's just go into a little bit about what you underwent insofar as that you told us you were abroad. The doctors just diagnosed that you had this small cell carcinoma, it's a rare ovarian origin, and you chose and elected to come back home to South Africa to start your treatment.
I personally chose that because my family was here, and knowing what cancer does to treatment, the chemotherapy, emotionally you need that support. And I have to say, alhamdulillah, my family has been incredible in giving me that emotional support during my chemotherapy. So after I was got diagnosed, obviously came back home. I was then booked into Donald Gordon, it's a hospital in Johannesburg, where I met with an oncologist, and he in fact sent me for a scan prior to beginning treatment, just to see the extent of the disease. And after that scan, that's when we knew that my cancer had spread to 3 different parts of my body, making it a stage 4 diagnosis. Obviously, when you hear of stage 4, it's very difficult to treat, and therefore my oncologist wasn't too hopeful that chemotherapy would actually work, mainly because it had spread to so many different parts of my body. But we went through chemotherapy, obviously because my cancer was very aggressive. I had to be given an aggressive chemotherapy. As much as I've remained positive throughout, knowing that this was always planned, chemotherapy is dreadful. It is dreadful in the sense that it kills absolutely everything else in your body. Every 4 weeks, my mom and I would go to Johannesburg for my treatment. It would take me at least 15 days to recover from 1 cycle of chemotherapy before my body was ready for the next. So for about 7 to 10 days after I was given my chemotherapy, I would throw up without having anything ingested in my body. So it makes one weak because you're throwing up with nothing in your body. There aren't leeches going in. And so that was for 6 months. We did that continuously for 6 months. And thereafter I had to go for another scan so that it could be compared to the first scan. And through Allah's grace and mercy, my cancer was now localized, which my oncologist obviously couldn't believe. Firstly, because he had no confidence that the chemo was going to do any good. And after that, when surgery was possible for me to have my reproductive organs removed so that I could get rid of this dreadful thing called cancer.
If you just tuned into the program, it is the Reminders program with me, Abdullah. My guest on the line is Uzma Hayat. She's from Rustenburg. We're talking about ovarian cancer, the Angelina Jolie effect, opening up the platform, femininity, women's decisions with regards to their body. All of that is on up for discussion on the Reminders program. If you would like to join the conversation, 011-854-1548. You can tweet at Zana_ZA or mail me, zana@radioislamlive.com. Uzma, let's come back to this issue of chemotherapy. I didn't think it was going to work. My doctor didn't think it was going to work. And I find that very, very hard. How do you make a decision to undergo chemotherapy, knowing that, your doctor's not putting any faith in it and it's going to kill every good thing within you?
I strongly believe that obviously what comes from Allah and can be removed from Allah can take it away as well. And for me was that I had to try, whether it was chemotherapy or not. So I went and decided, let me just head back a bit. Before I decided on chemotherapy, I come from a home that's very alternative, medicine focused and not really conventional. So it was a bit of a debate for us to decide whether to go conventional or whether to do alternative. So that was before we knew that it was a stage 4 diagnosis. So after we were told it was stage 4, I decided, okay, maybe it's a bit risky just doing alternative, mainly because there's no scientific evidence on any alternative therapy for cancer. But like I said, the reason I chose to do treatment was because I had to try. For me, it wasn't a matter of, okay, it's stage 4, I'm going to die. That wasn't it. For me, it was, I sent this, I've got to try and fight it, knowing that I have done my best to do it, the rest is in Allah's hands. And I'm glad that I did, because if I didn't try, I don't know where we really would be. And in conjunction with chemotherapy, we did a lot of alternative therapy as well, which I think also played a major impact in my recovery and eradicating this cancer.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Okay, but coming back to, let's look at your psychological, your psyche, your frame of mind, how you felt from an emotional perspective. when you wrote your email, I sensed the strength. When I listen to your voice, I can hear strength, positivity, tawakkul and a trust in Allah the Almighty, which is fantastic. It is wonderful. Allahumma zid. But there's another side to that, Uzma, the side that we don't write about, the side that we don't tell, and that's something that you undergo on your own. And but what did you find that was the most important thing that helped you to keep on going on in those dark moments when all you're doing is just throwing up and you feel absolutely terrible?
Dark moments knowing that, I'm going to come back to saying this, everything was that it was, for me, it's Allah's plan, and that is my core at what got me through is that I have to go through this throwing up, I have to go through this to get to a better state. So those were my dark days. I mean, I had days where I just cried all the time. And in those days, my mommy would just sit with me and that's all she did, and that's all I needed. I didn't need her to tell me, you know what, be strong, or it's going to be okay. We know that. I know I have the strength. I know it's going to be okay. But all I needed was her comfort, and that's what she did. So when I cried the day, all she did was sit with me. I'd experienced emotions like anger. You just want to throw things, but that's also because of one of the side effects of chemotherapy. So when things like that happened, my dad was around to pray over me. So it wasn't just me. It was a whole family structure that allowed me to get to where I am. So when I felt those dark days were coming, I knew that my parents and my sisters were there to uplift me.
Did you feel a lot of guilt as well? That, look, I'm putting them through so much. How did you cope with the guilt? Or how do you still cope with it?
I think my biggest emotion and the biggest thing that I still haven't gotten over is that guilt, because they have made me their priority over the past 9 months. And alhamdulillah for that. I know that Allah sent me this family for that reason. But at the same time, we are humans and we feel these emotions. And guilt is one of that, is that I've been their priority over the 9 months. And till today, I'm still their priority because I'm still recovering from it. And I know my parents, if there was a cure at the end of the world, they would have gone to get that for me just so that we could rid of this stage 4 crazy diagnosis. So the guilt is there because everything was put on hold. I have a 10-year-old sister who was neglected because of my diagnosis, because I needed more attention than her. I have a sister who's 9 matric that was neglected because of my diagnosis. I have a sister who's doing her honours now that was neglected as well because of me. So all of that guilt, of course, plays around because they haven't been given as much as attention as they needed to be, especially my 10-year-old sister. I mean, she's still young. She was used to getting that attention. And now all of a sudden, the oldest is getting the attention. So for me, that was hardest, the most painful, is that I had to now be the priority. Whereas previously, I would put everybody else first, just as my mom would. And now it's sort of the cards or the tables turned, where I needed that from him. So the guilt is there, and it will be there, but I say alhamdulillah at the same time, because as much as I feel guilty, I know that this path would be a lot harder if I didn't have to.
Yeah, and also the fact that that is their fate that Allah has chosen for them in their lives, for them to be for you. So it's a whole lot of maturing. Do you think that a lot of cancer patients, those who have undergone it, those who have survived it, don't have these very important discussions at the time, because treatment takes precedence and emotions take a back.
Absolutely, and I also think that once they've recovered or whatever, they've forgotten about it because it's been such a dark space that I've experienced it. And for me, it's not like that. For me, it wasn't a darker space as others see. For me, it's a new opportunity for me to do good with my diagnosis.
Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward your family for that and keep them there for you and allow all families to have that advantage. But let's move on now to this female health issue. You know, I told you I'm going to be talking about femininity, women taking control over their own bodies. And one thing that I drew from that Angelina effect discussion was that it's you taking your own decisions into your own hands. Traditionally, when we look at women and female health, we're always focusing on reproductive health and sexual health. And not considering that, of course, these are related to the entire body, related to so many other facets. But reproductive health and sexual health takes precedence when we talk about the issues of women's health specifically. Now, it's something like this where you've had ovaries removed, you've gone into early menopause. What were some of the things that you considered, or have you not considered before you took this decision?
Like you say, women are portrayed as just being child bearers, and that's the main focus of our femininity. But I think that's possibly the wrong focus and the wrong way of being portrayed, because there's so much else that encompasses us: our compassion, our kindness, our gentleness, our sensitivity, our ability to empathize. More than the male species. So, in my opinion, I think the focus on just reproducing should be on the other attributes of femininity as well. And obviously, the first few things that went through my mind when I knew that I had to have my ovaries removed was, the first thing was, I'm not going to be able to have my own children. And I think that's probably the first thing that will go through anybody's mind when they're told, okay, you've got to sort of have a hysterectomy, everything's going to come out, you're not going to be able to have kids. But after that, I think my 4 years of psychology obviously did help me tenfold in the way I think and the way I've been thinking throughout the processes. So for me, after having dealt with not being able to have my own children and whatever, psychologically I had to also remind myself that that's not the only reason I'm a woman. That's not the only reason that makes me feminine. And like I said, it's all the other things that do make us feminine. And I think our focus needs to change. We're not just here to bring children into this world. There's a lot more to us than just that.
Yeah, so I think the platform then opens for those discussions. If we look, it's in the Sunnah, all of that is in our prophetic Sunnah. We're always talking about, for example, Aisha radiallahu anha, the fact that she was such an inspirational woman, that she left such a legacy, but she didn't have any children. And aside from that, the Prophet ﷺ referred to her nephew Abdullah as her child, therein again saying that it doesn't mean that if you don't have biological children, that you don't have children. So you extend your influence way beyond just physically bearing those children. But at the same time, do you think that is just second prize? A lot of the time we placate ourselves with that type of talk. When you have the hard conversation, do you think that is just how you make sabr? Or is it something more than that?
Sabr in a sense, sorry, I'm going to just ask you to rephrase your question.
I'll rephrase my question as that a lot of the times we believe in our heart of hearts that the primary biological reason for us to have certain parts of our body is that you can bear children. And when that doesn't happen, then we move on to the next best thing. Okay, we're going to look at the example of Aisha radiallahu anha. Okay, we're going to look at the example of Rabia Basriya, etc., etc. Do you think that shift it needs to take place, or it's just natural that we're always going to believe we are primarily child bearers?
I think it's natural because biologically that is what it is, but at the same time the shift needs to take place because I think because we ourselves put so much emphasis on wanting our own biological children that in the event we can't have them, it creates a huge psychological discomfort, it makes a huge psychological impact, and we fail to forget the other reasons we are here. It's not just to produce children, biological children in a sense. And I think we need to understand that even if you can have your biological children, what stops us from doing development? What stops us from adopting other children? What stops us from taking kids that are not ours into our homes and care for them, regardless of whether they are biological or not?
Uzma, I love your positivity and the fact that you are articulate, you've taken the time to control your emotions, just sift through your your emotions. You become obviously a great ambassador to those who are undergoing the same kind of experience. You said that once you're out of your bed rest, you're going to join the Cancer Association in Rustenburg?
Yes, that is my plan. I just feel that it's a lot easier to speak to somebody who's been through the same experiences than having to interact with somebody who hasn't. Look, Hamza has the fantastic and the best support, but at the same time, what's good is to speak to somebody who knows what it feels like to throw up. Because when I'm throwing up my insides, look, my parents are there for me, but they don't feel what it feels like. And I've realized that people like to speak to people who have similar experiences because they feel a more sense of compassion, a more sense of a positive link, knowing that somebody else has been through it and they have been okay. So I can go through it and I can also be okay. And that's it for me, is that it's just to get somebody else out of that bed, out of that negative thought process, to know that it's going to be okay. And even what's important for me, even if my doctor said to me, you've got 5 years to live, for me what was important was that having a good, positive 5 years, knowing that you've left this earth having a 5 productive years of life. Okay, we can't stipulate when we're going to pass on. That is in our hands completely. But a lot of us fall into a very dark space when your doctor says you've got a stage 4 diagnosis, you've got 2 years to live, that's it. We sort of then go back to the thoughts, why me, or you go into depression, complete depression, not realizing, let me live a full productive 2 years instead of moping for those 2 years. And when I spoke to one of the directors or the workers at the Cancer Association, and she says many of their patients do go into that. And even if it's one person for me that I can help overcome that is going to be my next few priorities in life for now.
Inshallah, wishing you all the luck with that. There have obviously been people listening to us nodding their heads, those are suffering from cancer, those who have family members that have undergone this kind of treatment. What would you suggest as good resources, good reading books, good material that they can read that gives them a little show of solidarity, a sense of the whole procedure?
I'll be honest to say I myself have done no reading on hopeful survivors, so I personally, and I'm sorry to say that I have no recommendations. However, I can look into it and perhaps recommend a few after I've read it.
Yes, I would appreciate that. We all have those family members that have undergone it, and because we're so involved in the process, getting into treatments, getting out of treatments, oh, we're so sick, can we make the food? We sometimes don't have the time or the privilege to be able to read through something and sift through all of these things that you talked about today.
Absolutely, and I actually do apologize that I don't have anything to recommend, but I'll definitely look into it. Like you said, it's a whirlwind. You're actually not looking for some. Well, personally, I wasn't looking to read through anything. For me, it was a day-to-day survival to get through my treatment, to get to the next day. But now that I have the time, and now that I know what it's like to be a survivor, I'm definitely going to have that looked into. So the best thing